Pyrrha's Hollow slept beneath twin suns, a modest village cradled by the green hills of New Thessalonica. The breeze carried the scent of mossroot and river lily, brushing over stone houses with wind chimes and solar panels over farmers tending to synthleaf crops, and over Adrien Vale's quiet little garden behind the schoolhouse. She moved with ease among the blooms, bare hands in the soil, soft hum on her lips. Her daughter Eva sat cross-legged on the porch, sketching the sunflowers with stubborn concentration. Jace, her younger brother, chased solar moths with a net, laughing when they blinked out of reach. Adrien raised her head at the sound, a smile tugging at her lips. The garden was full this year. Tomatoes hung heavy, beams wrapped tightly around a wooden pole carved with old earth symbols. Her fingers, quick, practiced, plucked herbs from the rows and dropped them into a cloth pouch. At the edge of the garden, her tools were neatly arranged, and beside them, a worn history book with pages marked in ink. Later that day, Adrien stood before her students, chalk in hand, as she traced star charts across the old smartboard. Before the Empire, she said gently, there were the independent Terran colonies. We weren't always subjects of a throne. A student raised a hand. But the Empire brought peace, right? Adrien paused, looking out the window toward the horizon where black dots streaked across the sky dropships. Dozens of them. She set the chalk down slowly. Sometimes peace isn't the absence of war. Sometimes it's just silence. That night, she told Ava and Jace the story of the Stormhawk, a mythical bird that guarded its nest with lightning in its feathers. Jace wanted to know if the Empire had ever fought one. Adrien smiled and shook her head. Even they know better. When the first transport landed, the town gathered in the square. Imperial banners were unfurled. Silver-armored soldiers marched with synchronized precision. A high-ranking centurion, face unreadable beneath his helmet, declared the beginning of protective dominion. The village was to comply. All communications were to be monitored. Curfews were imposed. Adrien said nothing. She stood at the back of the crowd, a scarf wrapped loosely around her arms. The centurion's eyes swept across the villagers. They hesitated for just a second when they passed her. Something in her posture, something in her stillness. The next day, an Imperial patrol passed by her garden. One soldier slowed. He saw her kneeling by the stone path, planting bluebell seedlings. He watched the way she moved, precise, deliberate. When a pot clattered behind her, she spun instinctively. Low and ready, her eyes locked onto the sound before her body relaxed. He blinked. His hand drifted toward his weapon, then paused. She looked back at him calmly. For a moment, his mind flickered with warning, a name he couldn't place. But then he saw her smile at her daughter and decided he was imagining it. That night, Adrien unwrapped her forearm in the privacy of her bedroom. The ink had faded with years, but the symbol remained 7 blades in a circle, crowned with fire. She touched it with reverence, then kissed her children's foreheads goodnight. The soft glow of the night lamp settled over the family like a lullaby. Outside, the Imperial flag now hung limp beside the schoolhouse, but the ground beneath it had begun to shift. The air tasted different the morning they came, thicker, metallic, as if the sky itself held its breath. Adrien stood barefoot in the garden, cradling her steaming mug, watching dark contrails stitch across the horizon. It had been a week since the Empire officially occupied New Thessalonica. The soldiers grew more brazen by the day. What began as curfews and searches had become detentions, interrogations, disappearances. The local mayor, a soft-spoken man named Ren Elgard, hadn't been seen in 3 days. Jace hadn't slept well. He clung to her leg that morning, refusing to go to the village square where Imperial educators now held indoctrination lectures. Ava, more perceptive, more like her mother than Adrien wanted to admit, had started to draw dark things, burning ships, broken flags, and hollow-eyed soldiers. Adrien dressed in silence. She wore her scarf tighter today, pulling it high to cover the old tattoo. Her fingers lingered over a hidden pocket stitched into the inside hem of her coat. Something small and cold waited there, a shard of hardened polyceramic, shaped like a blade tip, long since snapped from the hilt it once belonged to. She carried it like a talisman. Like guilt. At noon, the sky split open. 4 transports screamed overhead, banking hard toward Pyrrha's Hollow. Adrien knew the sound, knew the formation. It wasn't a supply run, it was a punitive sweep. She was already running before they landed, down the dirt path, past the old mill, toward the square where the children had been taken for daily indoctrination. Her lungs burned, but her mind stayed cold, calculating. She cut through the alleys. She slipped behind buildings. When she reached the square, her heart stopped. Centurions had cordoned off the platform. A crowd was gathered, silenced by fear. Adrien spotted Ava and Jace on their knees, hands bound, eyes wide. A high-ranking officer she hadn't seen before stood above them, reading from a scroll with ceremonial gravity. These children were found with anti-imperial literature. Treason, a violation of Dominion Code Theta 7. For this crime execution, Ava screamed for her mother. Jace sobbed. Adrien stepped forward. And stopped. A hand gripped her shoulder. An old woman, weeping silently, shook her head. Around them, villagers watched. Some clutched one another. Some turned away. None moved. Adrien trembled not with fear, but with restraint. Her vision blurred. Her muscles screamed to act, to fight, to kill. She had done so much killing, but she had buried that part of herself for them. The officer raised his pistol. Let this be a message to any who would resist the Emperor's peace. 2 shots cracked the air. The world didn't fall. Silent it exploded. Adrien stood frozen as the crowd dissolved around her. The scent of burning plasma filled her nose. Her knees buckled. She didn't cry. Couldn't. Her body had gone numb. Somewhere deep inside her, something ancient and buried screamed. The officer stepped over the bodies. Burn them. Leave the ashes in the square. He passed Adrien without recognizing her. Just another villager. Just another crushed insect. That night, the village did not sleep. Adrien sat beside the charred platform where her children had died. Her fingers traced the ash, collecting small remnants in a cloth. She didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't move for hours. When the twin moons reached their apex, she stood. She walked back to her home, entered her cellar. She tore down the false wall behind the storage crates. Behind it, sealed in vacuum stasis, waited the past. Her armor, matte black with crimson lining. A sidearm she had once dropped from orbit and caught midair. A blade forged from Draxian obsidian. Tactical schematics of Imperial logistics networks. Access codes to war satellites that had never been decommissioned. Her command AI greeted her with a voice like an old friend. Welcome back, General Vale. Adrien stood there for a long time, holding her children's ashes in one hand and the activation key in the other. Then she gave the order. Begin protocol Scorch Feather. Target. All frontier military supply lines. Phase 1. The AI paused. Acknowledged. Please confirm authorization with legacy call sign. Adrien spoke the words with ice in her voice. Iron Widow. Authorization Vale 49. Lights across the panel flickered to life. A network of orbital satellites, dormant for years, awoke across half a sector. Across space, Imperial cargo routes blinked red. Confirmed. Execution in progress. Estimated casualties high. Adrien turned to the wall. A faded photo of Ava and Jace was pinned there. She picked it up, ran her thumb over their faces. "Let it begin," she whispered. Then she stepped into her armor and old, deadly skin, and the war came back to life with her. The stars didn't blink the night the stalwart Seraph vanished. It was an Imperial cruiser 3 kilometers long, 600 soldiers on board, dozens of fighters in its hangars, a command deck lined with obsidian and gold. Its last transmission was routine, orbital patrol over New Thessalonica. 37 minutes later, it was gone. No debris, no explosion, no mayday. Only one thing remained on the emergency frequency, looping endlessly through static. They were mine. At first, Imperial Command assumed a systems error. A glitch. Pirates, maybe. But then came the second strike. Fuel depots along Corridor Theta 9 ignited in synchronized detonations. A week's worth of supply torched in seconds. The security footage was corrupted, overwritten with an old Terran nursery rhyme lullaby, once sung on Earth before the collapse. The rhyme played over footage of the depot crews hanging upside down, their blood painting the walls in spiraling, purposeful patterns. Every site bore the same symbol, 7 blades in a circle, crowned with fire. They hadn't seen that insignia in 20 years. In the war rooms of the Inner Empire. Old generals stared at it in silence, hearts sinking. One of them, the oldest, stood, slowly left the meeting and shot himself in his quarters. Meanwhile, Adrien Vale moved like a ghost through the stars. She didn't lead an army. She didn't need one. She struck at night. She never left bodies behind, only ruins, warnings, and questions. Imperial patrols stopped flying over certain systems. Outposts failed to check in. A dreadnought deployed to the edge of the frontier suffered an internal AI rebellion. Its own security drones turned on the command staff and sealed the bridge doors with plasma welds. The only message broadcast before blackout: Vale is vengeance. Vale is awake. They had trained her, fed her their secrets. She remembered their encryption patterns, their weak points, their fallback doctrines. She didn't destroy armies, she infected them with doubt, with fear. Entire platoons would receive falsified orders, leading them into traps she'd engineered from their own manuals. And always, always, she left messages in blood. For Ava, for Jace. A pattern emerged, but it wasn't rebellion, it was surgical. She wasn't sowing chaos at random. She was dissecting the Empire's frontier infrastructure piece by piece, cutting supply lines, isolating garrisons, targeting key officers. Her actions were guided by brutal clarity. She wasn't trying to win a war. She was trying to end one. Before it began, on the mining world of Lorthus, an imperial governor's palace was found abandoned. Its outer walls had been breached without explosives. Inside, the governor and his entire family were arranged in their formal banquet uniform, sitting upright at the dining table. Their throats slit, their eyes burned out with a thermal blade. At the center of the table was a recording device. It played only 2 words, spoken in a calm, even tone: mirror cost. The emperor himself finally demanded answers. Inquisitors scoured the archives, chasing names, comparing tactics. And one word kept returning, in half-erased war logs and forbidden battle accounts: Vale. Adrien Vale. General Adrien Vale. Dead, they said. Disappeared after the Treaty of Tyrants. Moon, the Iron Widow, whose final campaign left 4 worlds scorched and 7 commanders broken. A name meant to be buried, but the past doesn't stay buried. Especially not when it grieves. Back on New Thessalonica, her old home stood, empty, untouched. Villagers whispered now. They had seen her walking in the night, dressed in black, speaking to no one. A farmer claimed she'd passed through his field like a shadow, and by morning, Every Imperial surveillance drone in the Valley had been reduced to slag. Children left little offerings at her doorstep, drawings of birds made of fire, or messages like, "We miss Ava and Jace too." The Empire dispatched a fleet to the Sector 6 ships, led by Admiral Reese Juno, a veteran of the old wars. He didn't underestimate her. He prepared for her like one would for a god of death. It didn't matter. His fleet entered orbit. Within 12 hours, his flagship was hijacked remotely. His own command codes used against him. Life support disabled. His final act was a transmission, face bloodied, whispering, "You didn't kill her. You created her." By then, Adrien had already moved on. Her next target wasn't military, it was symbolic. A monastery archive on Velphus 3 that housed the Empire's victory records over Earth. A library of conquest, propaganda, and rewritten history. She destroyed it not with fire, but with exposure. She hacked its system and transmitted every classified war crime committed by the Empire during the colonization of humanity. Massacres, chemical sterilization, child experimentation. Every terminal, holoscreen, and DataNet node in the region received the message at once. There was no commentary, just images, names, dates, coordinates, and one line of text burned across them all. "This is what you killed my children to protect." The revolution didn't begin because of speeches. It began because the truth hit like fire in dry grass. Adrien. Vale didn't just come for vengeance. She came to remind the galaxy that fear still had a name. The fire was never quenched on Draxus, not truly. Not even decades later, when the bones of fallen war machines rusted under alien moons, and the ash of its last breath still drifted in the wind like cursed snow. The Empire thought they knew what. Adrien Vale was thought she was a broken mother lashing out in grief. But Chapter 4 wasn't written in grief. It was carved in fire by who she truly was. Not a teacher, not a widow, but a war-sculpted monster forged in Earth's bloodiest crucible. They called her the Iron Widow in whispers during the Tyrant War. But that wasn't a name she gave herself. That title came from what she did and what she sacrificed in the name of victory. 20 years before New Thessalonica burned, Adrien commanded Earth's 9th Storm Division during the siege of Draxus, a campaign so vicious the stars themselves seemed to weep. Draxus was where Adrien made her name a curse. Outnumbered, outgunned, and left abandoned by command, she held the colony with 40,000 soldiers against a 1,000,000-strong Empire offensive. She didn't retreat. She didn't surrender. Instead, she ordered the detonation of the orbital refineries, creating a planetary ring of fire that trapped the enemy inside the atmosphere. It killed everyone's soldiers, civilians, her own people, but it bought Earth time. It won the war. When her superiors tried to court-martial her, she stood in silence. Eyes hollow, uniform scorched. The verdict was never announced. Days later, the court building was destroyed in an accident, and Adrien was quietly discharged with honors. She vanished soon after, slipping into the forgotten corners of the post-war frontier. Until now. Now? Those same war stories the Empire had tried to bury resurfaced with terrifying relevance. Analysts began comparing her current strikes to her past campaigns. It was undeniable. The rhythms matched, the targets, the philosophy. No wasted movement, no prolonged suffering, surgical destruction, psychological ruin. But this time there were no restraints. No chain of command. No oversight. Just a Drien. She didn't just attack military targets anymore. She targeted meaning. On the moon barge of Callion's Rest, Adrien intercepted a diplomatic convoy carrying treaties, trade pacts, and dozens of influential mid-tier governors. She let them land. Let them disembark. Let them begin their pompous ceremony. Then she sealed the hangars, shut off life support, and transmitted their final hours live across every system within reach. No speeches, just the slow realization of death among the Empire's polished elite. The Empire labeled her a terrorist, but their own people weren't so sure. Subjugated species, Threx, Kalari, even some highborn Xerix nobles began idolizing her. Not as a monster, not even as a human. As retribution. On Earth, ancient resistance cells buried in city ruins unearthed old murals of the Iron Widow, painting them over government walls. Soldiers began carving her insignia into their armor, not in defiance, but in reverence. She was no longer just fighting a war. She was becoming a symbol of vengeance incarnate. But behind every ghost, there's a beating heart. Back on her stealth cruiser, an old converted mining vessel named Ava's Mercy, Adrien stared at a holopic of her children before every mission. She still wore their final drawing under her armor, a page filled with stars and stick figures, labeled Mommy Ava Jace in child scroll. That was what fueled her, not hate, not power. Absence. She recorded logs between attacks, never meant to be heard, private, broken, human. I don't remember Ava's voice. I remember her cry when she was born. But her laugh, it's fading. I kill and kill, but it doesn't bring her back. And the worst part is, I don't want it to stop. I want them to burn. I want them to feel. The logs were never transmitted, but the silence she left behind after each attack spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the Empire grew paranoid. Every corner of their regime became infected with doubt. Loyal officers defected out of fear she'd appear. Others executed their subordinates on suspicion of collaboration. Internal security collapsed under the weight of imagined betrayal. She didn't have to fight them. She let them destroy themselves. On the 10th anniversary of Ava and Jace's death, Adrien returned to New Thessalonica. For one night, disguised in civilian clothes, she stood in the ashes of Pyrrha's Hollow. The Empire had long abandoned the village. Nature had taken over, ivy wrapped around scorched buildings. The schoolhouse had collapsed. She walked through the ruins until she found the memorial stone the villagers had raised small, hand-carved, written in unpolished Terran, for the ones who were loved, and the one who loved them too much to stay quiet. She lit a candle. She left no message, but 2 days later, the Empire's Sector 9 command station detonated in orbit, its reactor melting through the moon it sat on, leaving a permanent wound. Visible from 100 light-years away, they began to whisper again, even the most loyal officers. Not in fear. In awe. They had made a martyr. But they had awakened the myth. And Adrien Vale was far from done. The Empire's border sectors had once burned with arrogance, fortified walls of steel and pride stretching from the mining moons of Altherian to the fortress rings of Neres Prime. But now, the fire was different. Now it was real. Fuel stations ignited like kindling. Fleet paths were littered with debris fields that told stories no one dared decode. Refineries once guarded by legions now stood abandoned, messages scorched into their outer hulls in Terran glyphs. One breath closer. You taught me how to kill. Your gods won't answer you. Imperial High Command had exhausted every narrative. She was a rebel, a terrorist, a myth created by separatists to sow unrest, but none of it held. Too many officers had vanished. Too many ships never returned. Entire battalions changed allegiances, whispering one name before walking away from the Empire. Adrien Vale. In desperation, the Emperor turned to fear. A bounty was placed on her head alive, not dead. They wanted her broken. They wanted to parade her through the capital in chains, on her knees beneath the marble spires of Tyrolus. The message was simple. You are not bigger than the Empire. So he summoned the most ruthless force in the Empires. Shadows, the Inquisitors of Silence, 3 elite agents known only by their call signs, Glaive, Whisper, and Iron Hand. They had never failed. Their mission was absolute: locate Adrien Vale, break her, bring her back alive. They found her trail in the wreckage of a collapsed garrison on Vornis 6. All 60 defenders had died without firing a shot. No alarms, no gunfire. Just bodies, peaceful, almost posed, each with their name tags cut off and placed on their chest like grave markers. Glaive said nothing, only clenched his fists. Whisper smiled. She's inviting us. They followed her across 3 systems. On Terex, she led them into an asteroid field, where the Inquisitor's dropship was torn apart by mines she'd placed years ago, anticipating this chase. Iron Hand barely made it out alive. On Renther's edge, she rerouted the planet's weather control satellites, trapping the Inquisitors in an electric storm so violent it cracked the planetary shield. Still, they pursued. Still, she stayed ahead. And then she stopped running. She let them catch her on Station Blackspire, an abandoned Imperial listening post floating on the edge of uncharted space. There was no ambush, no defense. Just Adrien Vale sitting alone in the control room, unarmed, calm, waiting. Glaive charged first. He didn't make it halfway across the corridor before his skull ruptured. She'd hacked the gravity panel beneath him. Whisper moved next, dancing through shadows, blade drawn, only to find herself in a sealed room full of decompression valves. She screamed. Then nothing. Only Iron Hand reached her. He was the strongest, the most loyal. His synthetic arms had crushed war tanks. His mind, rewired for obedience, could not comprehend fear until Adrien spoke. I remember you, she said, her voice low. You were at Pyrrha's Hollow. You turned away. He hesitated. That was all it took. Adrien moved like death itself, cold, sudden, unstoppable. She didn't kill him. She broke him, piece by piece. Not out of rage but precision. Like she was dissecting regret. When the Empire recovered the Inquisitor's ship a week later, it was floating lifeless through the drift. The only message on board was a video feed. Adrien, blood-slicked, silent, stood before the camera. In one hand, she held the Emperor's sigil, torn from Iron Hand's armor. In the other, 2 small, delicate shoes, worn but clean. Ava's, Jace's. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The feed ended with her stepping into darkness, her shadow flickering like smoke. Back in the core worlds, terror bloomed. Entire cruisers mutinied rather than be deployed near the frontier. Cadets fled there. Academies when rumors spread that Adrien Vale was seen near their system. Highborn nobles faked injuries, bribed doctors, poisoned rivals, anything to avoid proximity to her legend. One high commander, noble by blood, decorated in medals, received deployment orders near New Thessalonica. He slit his own throat in front of the Admiralty Council. His final words, "You sent me to die. No, worse. You sent me to her." Even the Emperor began to falter. He stopped making public appearances. Rumors said he'd begun seeing her in his dreams, standing in his court, holding the shoes, watching him. Not speaking. Watching. The Inquisitors were supposed to be the Empire's final answer. Instead, they became her proof. Proof that no one, not even the hand of the Emperor himself, could touch her. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was becoming inevitable. A storm with a face. A reckoning with a name. Adrien Vale. The Emperor no longer slept. His chambers, once a sanctuary of marble light and orchestral silence, had become a bunker. Security droids rotated on hourly shifts. Psychic dampeners hummed against his skull day and night. He hadn't spoken in public in over 40 rotations. His advisors spoke for him now, trembling behind walls of ceremonial regalia and false confidence. The Empire still pretended to breathe, but in its lungs there was only smoke because of her, because of Adrien Vale. The whispers had long since bled beyond the frontier. On rich core worlds, in the palaces of noble-born governors, on the hidden decks of pirate ships and in the broken circuits of long-lost AI minds, her name had become more than myth. It had become scripture, and then, as if the galaxy itself paused for breath, came her quietest strike and her loudest message. It began in the void between Sectors 14 and 15, aboard the Imperial Truth Courier Vox Sanctum, a ship used exclusively to archive, edit, and distribute official Empire propaganda. Its vaults stored every rewritten history, every doctored battle report, every forged treaty, centuries of manufactured truth. The ship was considered untouchable, hidden, guarded by encryption. Systems older than some stars, but Adrien Vale didn't attack it with weapons. She attacked it with memory. One morning, every terminal across the Empire blinked blue. Not red, not war alert red. Blue, system override. A cascade of data streamed through the network's images, videos, names, confessions, documents stamped and signed. Not fakes, not fictions. Truth. Every atrocity the Empire had ever buried. The bombings of Eden's cradle. The sterilization of the Threx colonies. The child experiments on Earth during the war. Millions of secrets released in one breath and stamped on every frame. You killed my children to protect this. Civil unrest exploded like chain lightning. Governors fled. Soldiers wept or walked away from their posts. Uprisings ignited on 47 worlds within 12 hours. 10 sectors went dark. One imperial family known for their brutality during the human colonization were found crucified on their own palace gates, their blood spelling, "Tell me again about peace." The Emperor's rage shattered into desperation. He issued his first personal order in over a month. Adrien Vale was to be captured at all costs. He summoned his most ancient weapon, kept in cryostasis for decades, Project Revenant, a cybernetic warbird made from the gene-spliced remains of Earth's greatest traitors. It was no soldier. It was a designed extinction event. They called it the last answer. The Revenant traced her to the bastion of Tyrolus, the Empire's oldest stronghold, carved into the mountains of a planet soaked in blood. They expected a trap, a fortress, siege, a battle worthy of the legends. What they found was worse. The bastion was empty. Not abandoned, vacated. In silence, every guard missing, every turret hacked, every camera looped. The Revenant proceeded to the throne chamber, where it found her not waiting in ambush, but sitting quietly, dressed in the black and crimson armor of her forgotten rank, General Adrien Vale. No helmet. Just her face, human, tired, inevitable. "You're not the end," she said softly, rising. "You're just another mistake." The Revenant struck. And for the first time in its monstrous existence, it missed. She moved like memory itself, unseen, overwhelming, ruthless. Her blade, once thought shattered at Draxus, reactivated with a scream of heat. The Revenant's skull split in two before it could recalibrate. Its final logs recorded only one word: Mother. The Empire didn't receive an update. The Bastion went offline. Its final transmission came hours later on a secure channel, meant only for the Emperor himself. A video. Adrien Vale stood in the center of the Bastion's throne room. Her armor bore streaks of blood and fire. Behind her, the Imperial sigil burned slowly, melting into slag. In her hands, the Emperor's personal crest, still warm. And two small shoes, one blue, one pink. She didn't speak. Her eyes said everything. Then the screen went dark. For the first time in living memory, The emperor wept in front of his advisors. No one spoke. No one tried to stop him when he turned and walked alone into the Hall of Echoes where emperors go to die. Across the empire, the message spread like holy fire. Adrien Vale didn't just survive their worst. She faced it, unbroken, unyielding. She didn't ask for loyalty. She demanded nothing. But the systems answered her anyway. They began to fall, one by one. Not to rebellion, not to war. To her silence. The empire collapsed, not with a final battle, but with a slow, terrifying silence. The throne sat empty, tireless. Once the seat of 1,000 years of imperial rule was abandoned to ghosts and echoes. Ships no longer patrolled its skies. Its great banners, woven with the blood of conquered systems, were torn and scattered in the wind. Entire sectors stopped responding to central commands, not because they couldn't, but because they no longer feared the consequences. Fear had found a new shape. It wore the face of a mother. Adrien Vale. She didn't raise flags. She didn't build a fleet. She never declared herself queen, general, or savior. And yet, whole worlds began to invoke her name not as a leader, but as a judgment. On the moon of Frolus, where human children had once been sold to pay the empire's debts, slaves rebelled without a single weapon. When imperial overseers demanded order, the eldest among them whispered, "She's watching." The garrison fled. On Zacharith, the last intact empire fortress surrendered without a shot. Their commander opened the gates and broadcasted, "We kneel not to her, but to what we made her become." The rebellion she never asked for now stretched across 93 systems. She didn't lead it, she haunted it. A fleet of loyalist remnants tried to re-establish control, rallying behind a young regent who promised to restore order. They disappeared, en route to their staging point in the Vexary Nebula. Days later, the nebula pulsed bright red, brighter than any natural flare, and then turned cold, forever drained of power, energy, and life. A single transmission followed. No thrones for tyrants. No mercy for architects of silence. Then came her final message. It didn't appear in networks. It wasn't broadcast from towers or satellites. It appeared etched in stone, on the surface of Varnak Prime, the most fortified fortress world in the known galaxy. Adrien Vale walked alone through its front gates. The garrison, 10,000 strong, had already fled before she arrived, not because they saw her, but because they dreamed of her the night before, every one of them. Same nightmare. Same whisper. She left behind no bodies, no fire, no weapons. Just one inscription carved deep into the obsidian walls of the command citadel. "You took my children. I took your future." And then she vanished. No signals, no sightings, no more strikes. Some say she returned to the ashes of Pyrrha's Hollow, buried beneath the garden she once tended, wrapped in the cloak of her children's memory. Others claim she boarded a one-person vessel and flew into the black between galaxies, waiting for the next tyrant to rise. The galaxy healed slowly. Broken governments became republics. Subjugated species wrote new laws. The old flags of empire were burned and buried. And in the quiet, something new was born, not in her image, but in her absence. On hundreds of worlds, monuments rose, not of Adrien's face, but of two small shoes, cast in silver, resting on stone plinths. Beneath them, one phrase, "Even the stars burn in fear of a mother's wrath." Children grew up hearing the story of Adrien Vale not as legend, but as warning. Warning to every empire, every tyrant, every soldier who might raise a weapon against the innocent. Because in every corner of the galaxy, even long after she was gone, mothers whispered her name into the ears of their sleeping children, not to frighten them, but to remind them that the universe changed because a woman refused to stay silent. And somewhere, Out beyond the rim of known space, in a quiet sector without a name, a garden grows again. There are no guards. No monuments dot just wild bluebells growing in neat rows. And beside them, buried in the soil, a sealed case with her armor, her weapons, and one final note.